Welcome to The World Today on Channels Television. I am Amarachi Ubani. We begin today's program in South Africa, where Oscar Pistorius, a South African athlete, took to the stands for a third time this week to face fierce questioning about his version of events on the night he shot his girlfriend, Reeva Steenkamp. Prosecutor Jerry Nell began his cross-examination by pushing Mr. Pistorius to acknowledge the full magnitude of his actions on February 14th last year. But the athlete insisted that he made a terrible mistake when he shot Ms. Steenkamp in his home. A graphic picture of Ms. Steenkamp's head was shown to the court for the first time, prompting anguish from Mr. Pistorius and a further adjournment of proceedings.
At the Pretoria High Court today, Oscar Pistorius finished giving his testimony to Barry Rue before being cross-examined by prosecutor Gary Nell. The athlete fired 4 rounds through the door, 3 of which hit Steenkamp, killing her almost instantly.
When I got down to the bottom of the flight of stairs, either Mr. Stander or Chris Stander told me to put Reeva down. They said that the ambulance was on its way. Before I put her down, I said to them that we need to get to the hospital. We need to get to the hospital. And they said just put her down. The ambulance is on its way. That day with her, and I waited for the ambulance to arrive, and I felt helpless. I wanted to take her to the hospital. I had my fingers in her mouth to help her try breathe. I had my hand on her hip. I was trying to stop the bleeding.
Pistorius denied murder, saying he fired in the belief an intruder was behind the door. If found guilty of murder, he faces life in prison. Double amputee Pistorius, dubbed the Blade Runner for his running prothesis, became a global hero at the London 2012 Olympics when he made it to the 400-meter semi-final against able-bodied athletes.
Well, our correspondent in South Africa, Betty Dibe, has been monitoring Oscar Pistorius' progress in the courts. She joins us now via telephone. Betty, thanks for staying with us on the line. Mr. Pistorius continued his testimony of what happened that night of February 13th, 2013. Did you notice any difference in or any changes in his story of what happened of the first time he gave his testimony and this time that he took the stand in court?
What was established today, and I know we're going to see that for the next few days, is what the prosecution is supposed to do, pick holes in his testimony. Today, he picked some holes in between his testimony in chief, his bail application, and the plea statement. Different issues with regard to, for example, him going out to get the fan. Did you go out to get the fan? Mm-hmm. And then there was a zooming to the extension cord if indeed a fan was plugged and all that. So he's going to really keep picking these different statements or testimonies with a fine-tooth comb. And in the next few days, as he told him today, I'm not going away. I'll keep on with the questions. So we'll see that play out in the next few days. I don't know how long he's going to keep him. We know that when that's Advocate Hedinel, when he had the chief of police here in South Africa, that's Mr. Jackie Salevi, he had him on the stand for almost 2 weeks, about 9 days, and at the end of the day, he got him convicted of impropriety. So we don't know how long he's going to have him, but he's going to pick every single statement. And we see that Oscar Pistorius has been cautious in his answer, not wanting to implicate himself, but it's going to be hard given the way Advocate Hedinel is going about his cross-examination.
Yeah, about that, the chief prosecutor, Jerry Nell, of course, said he wanted Mr. Pistorius to take responsibility for his action. Did it look like he was trying to run away when he said that he is pleading not guilty because he said, I'm quoting him here, I'm pleading not guilty because what I am accused of did not happen? Did it sound like Oscar Pistorius was taking responsibility as the Chief Prosecutor Jerry Nell wanted him to?
He obviously he's taken responsibility for the fact that he took someone's life. But if you look at the four-count charge against him, the first one was premeditated murder. That is what he's saying. What I'm being accused of, I'm not guilty of. That's why he said he's not guilty. He says it was a mistake, not premeditated, like cold-blooded murder. So that, and he's been schooled, I guess, by his attorneys, but he indeed has to be careful what he admits to. But he's saying what I'm being accused of, which is, according to the state, premeditated murder, I'm not guilty of. That is where the not guilty, among the other smaller charges of discharging, a firearm in a public place and all that. But the issue of premeditated murder, he says, I'm not guilty.
Oh, thanks a lot.
It's not like running away, but he's been cautious to what he's admitting to.
Oh, thanks a lot, Betty. We know we will be, of course, you are our eyes on the ground in South Africa watching all the proceedings in court, Oscar Pistorius' testimony, as well as the other witnesses who are taking part in this trial in South Africa. Let's move on now to the latest on the missing Malaysian ship. Search teams combing the southern Indian Ocean for the MH370 have acquired signals that could be consistent with black box flight recorders. Officials say an Australian vessel heard the signals again on Tuesday afternoon and in the evening. As signals heard earlier had also been further analysed by experts who concluded that they were from specific electronic equipment.
Australian officials say 2 new ping signals had been detected in the search for missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, injecting fresh confidence into the search that had been struggling with a lack of information. Angus Houston, head of the Australian agency coordinating the search, said 1 ping was detected on Tuesday afternoon and lasted 5 minutes, 25 seconds, while a second was picked up on Tuesday night and lasted 7 minutes.
Ocean Shield has now detected 4 transmissions in the same broad area. Yesterday's signals will assist in better defining a reduced and much more manageable search area on the ocean floor. I believe we are searching in the right area, but we need to visually identify aircraft wreckage before we can confirm with certainty that this is the final resting place of MH370.
Over the weekend, the US Navy towed Pinger locator picked up 2 signals consistent with black box locator beacons, the first for more than 2 hours and the second for about 13 minutes. The batteries and the beacons have already reached the end of their 30-day expected life, making efforts to swiftly locate them all the more critical. The black boxes record cockpit data and may provide answers about what happened to the plane, which was carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew when it vanished on March the 8th and flew thousands of kilometers off its Kuala Lumpur to Beijing route. Authorities say evidence suggests the plane was deliberately diverted by someone familiar with the aircraft, but have not ruled out mechanical problems. Analysis of satellite data led investigators to conclude that the Boeing 777 came down in a remote area of the Indian Ocean. The search is now centered on an area approximately 2,261 kilometers northwest of Perth.
Let's go to Ukraine now, which has ordered pro-Russian activists who have taken over state buildings in eastern cities to dialogue with the government or face the use of force. Interior Minister Arsen Avakov said the situation will be resolved in 48 hours either way. Earlier, a number of people held inside a state security building in Luhansk since Sunday were freed. The EU, Russia, US and Ukraine are to meet next week in the first 4-way meeting since the crisis erupted. The talks are aimed at breaking the impasse since Russia annexed the southern Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea in February. Russian troops are now assembled along the borders of the two countries. Moscow has, in the meantime, warned Ukraine that using force to end the protests could lead to a civil war. Al Person, the VOA correspondent, joins us now from the VOA newsroom in London. Al, thanks for staying with us. And now, how serious is this threat by the Ukrainian government about the 48-hour ultimatum?
You know, to be honest, I did not read it as an ultimatum per se. I read it as a sort of a warning that they are prepared to use force and they expect the situation to be resolved within 48 hours. But I did not hear or actually read in translation the Interior Minister issuing exactly an ultimatum.
And so Russia says if Ukraine does apply force in removing these pro-Russian activists from these buildings, it will be tantamount to asking for a civil war. But really, does Russia have a right over these areas? I know I asked you this question yesterday, but that does confirm that Russia does have an ulterior motive in Ukraine. It confirms the soldiers on the borders prepared to move in, right?
Well, again, I wouldn't put too much store by rhetoric. Certainly Russia has interests in eastern Ukraine, interests in the whole of Ukraine, but whether they will actually send those troops across the border or whether they just want to use them as not a bargaining chip, but just as something they can hold over the Ukrainian authorities, you know, that's another question. Russia may say it'll spark a civil war. They may say there are fascists in Kiev, in control in Kiev. They may say a lot of things, but whether they will actually make a military move, as we talked about yesterday, will be determined by other factors, including, I think, the Western threats of increased sanctions, because the sanctions are already hurting Russia and Russian companies quite a bit. And I think it is really a good sign that the U.S., Russian, and Ukrainian foreign ministers will be meeting in a few days, because until now, as you know, Russia has refused to meet with senior officials of the interim government because they consider it illegitimate. And this has been a big American goal, to get the Russian and Ukrainian foreign ministers into the same room. So that will happen.
So is it likely that Russia is instigating these protests in order to take over these cities? And is it likely that the international community will be able to stop Russia just before it plans or executes its takeover or its annexation of the eastern cities?
Well, certainly Secretary Kerry said yesterday that Russia is instigating this unrest in eastern Ukraine. He accused agents and provocateurs from Russia of doing that. But again, whether the goal is to take over those cities or simply to create problems for the Kiev government, or to increase its influence or improve its bargaining position in these talks that are happening in a few days, again, that's a different question. So just because there's unrest, just because Russia allegedly is instigating it, doesn't necessarily mean that their next move will be to take over. As for what the West can do about it, what the West can do is just talk and sanctions and threats of more sanctions, and really needs to ask Russia whether it wants to go farther down that road that's making a lot of people in Europe think about the Cold War, think about increasing defense spending, think about trusting Russia less, think about doing less business with Russia, especially if there's a period of sanctions ahead. So I think these are all very serious considerations for President Putin and his government. And again, just because there's a lot of rhetoric and just because there's a military exercise doesn't mean Russia's moving in. They might. I'm not saying they won't, but we don't know for sure.
Well, thanks a lot, Al. Of course, we'll have to wait for the next few days and see how this plays out, especially as the 48-hour ultimatum runs out in Ukraine. Thanks a lot for your insights on that.